our expert panel today, the legal Frontlines, addressing substance use among justice-involved veterans. Some of my favorite people over there, too. Hey, Lucas. When I look out into this crowd, I see a crowd full of people with servants' hearts, and that is my passion, is to put people with servants' hearts together. So I'm going to introduce the panel. There's content warning. Some of the topics to be discussed may include suicide, self-injurious behavior, substance use, depression, post-traumatic stress, and/or other mental disorders which can act as triggers. Please feel free to excuse yourself at any point should you feel uncomfortable, and let somebody know. We'll come out with you. All right, I'm going to ask our panel to come up, and the moderator, Honorable Angel Menendez. Would you come up? Come on up. He will moderate for us today. He is the State of North Carolina District 10 Magistrate, retired. Panelist, Honorable Lou Oliveira, District Court Judge, Cumberland County Veteran Treatment Court. Please come up. Panelist, Chris Budnick, Executive Director of Healing Transitions. Look forward to hearing from you. Panelist, Lucas Verbreski, Veterans Justice Program, Durham Veterans Administration Healthcare System, and Derek Sharp, our resident Marine, I'm told, and security analyst, the United States Marine Corps combat veteran. Welcome to our panel, and you may be seated.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Great. It's great to be here with you, and we have a great event going on with some panel experts speaking from the heart, speaking from their personal perspective and their knowledge and wisdom and what they do day in and day out on behalf of veterans. So we have Chris Budnick. I'm going to have them briefly introduce themselves. Chris Budnick. We have Judge Oliveira. We have Lucas. And we have Derek Sharp. So please, Judge.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Like it says up there, I'm one of the judges in Cumberland County. I do many courts there, but I've been doing the Veterans Treatment Court for probably close to 11 years outside Fort Bragg.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Budnick, and I work with Healing Transitions. I'm a person in recovery, and I've had the blessing and the privilege of serving individuals that come to our organization to transform and restore their lives.
Peace and blessings. I'm Lucas Frubsky, social worker with the Durham VA, work with veterans inside state and federal prisons, trying to help them prepare for coming home.
Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Sharp. I am blessed to I'm also in recovery. I got 10 years now. And I started my journey in 2014 here in North Carolina. And I look forward to helping this evolve to see positive change for individuals that come after me and that are out there now.
Thank you, panel, for your brief introduction. Now we start with the discussion points that we have. We have approximately 10. We hope to get through all of them, but if we don't, we're going to give it a very best shot to certainly address those issues that we've found to be of interest and of importance. Judge, Chris, and Lucas, what are the links between substance abuse disorder and the criminal justice system? Chris, you want to?
Sure. Thank you. It's a long and somewhat complicated relationship, particularly for those addicted to drugs other than alcohol, which up until 1914 was not a criminal offense. And so we've seen certainly over the years different responses to addiction and intersections with public safety. We are fortunate in many ways that with the opioid crisis that has been going on for many years, that there's been an emphasis on a public health approach as well as a public safety approach, but that hasn't always been the case. And it's important that we continue to maintain that moving forward because, as I've heard many people say in public safety, we can't arrest our way out of these problems. And it's also important to recognize that there is, the community really gets robbed of opportunities if we don't get people help and only give them incarceration. The contributions that people can make when they get into recovery and transform their lives benefits everybody.
Thank you. Judge, would you care to add to what Chris's discussion is?
No, he's absolutely right. Outside Fort Bragg, you have North Carolina is probably the largest military community in the nation with Jacksonville, Fort Bragg, and Seymour Johnson. But I served for 8 years in combat, and I was injured, and the military was very good at tossing pills at you. And so, many years ago, Betty Goolsby, who was the director of the VA, said that the military and the VA was used to treating that as a symptom. So they would toss pills, and in the military, they want you, a good soldier will charge on, kind of, sleep deprivation, and through pain and injury, that makes them a good soldier. So there's kind of a link of treating that injury, and then when they get out, for whatever reason, because of substance abuse issues or mental health issues, or just end of enlistment, that substance abuse kind of sometimes lingers on. And then you see them, in many communities, get involved in criminal justice system, or characterized as justice involved vets for assortment of crimes. And that's how we deal with them in our Veterans Treatment Court. We try to address those issues that have been prevalent with them for many years.
Great, thank you. Lucas, you got some points to make and some experience to talk about?
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
So definitely, I think having a historical context, right? So when we talk about the opioid epidemic, we do well to remember that this is not the first one, that the first one was after the Civil War, right? And there was a lot of difficulties. When we look back at our history of laws regarding substances other than alcohol, we can look at the Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914, which criminalized all substances. We could look at the failed lessons from Prohibition, which we didn't glean. We could look at the war on drugs starting in 1971 and realize that these are all of the laws have never been about safety or health, right? If we look at them, they've always been tied to race and class, right? So from the first one outlawing opium dens in California, which was targeted against Chinese immigrants, right? Or when marijuana became criminalized. So it's always been tied to race or class. I think that's really important. So to look at it from a public health standpoint would require us to maybe stop trying to stigmatize and criminalize, right? If we're talking about what we know as a brain disorder that impairs the frontal cortex and makes decision-making difficult, we might want to treat it as such, right? So with veterans, we know that the majority of folks coming out are able to come back into our communities, right, with some assistance. I work for the VA. I'm grateful. I don't represent them in any way, shape, or form. These are my comments. But we know that the VA for many years was the biggest pusher on the block all around, right? You want a 90-day script in the mail? Here you go. And then what we did when we saw that, oh, this is a problem, is we cut folks off. So where do you think folks went to get their pain met? I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that we have to look at the social determinants of health, right? So we're talking about whole people, right? So addiction, substance use disorder, chaotic use, whatever you want to call it, that's one piece of a person, right? And we got to celebrate like any positive change. So trying to move away from criminalizing and more treating people as human beings and members of our community.
Awesome, thank you. How do we get veterans the help they need regarding substance abuse programs in our area, in our community? Judge, you want to?
Well, there are so many different programs out there, but yeah, you have to gain a rapport. The person wants to, will have to want to get help. And a lot of times is, I would say service members, maybe we're not the trusting of most people, or, like to be left alone. So it's kind of hard to break that barrier. In my position, I kind of deal with them on a forced march, unfortunately, but also fortunately. But even while they have to be there under a probationary, or we also do a pretrial program also, I think you have to gain a rapport with them. And so if you gain that rapport with them, I think they're more likely to kind of engage in those programs, mental health or substance abuse, if they kind of feel you're there for them, not necessarily there to put them in orange and send them to jail.
I often have heard you say, Judge, to meet them where they are. What does that mean to you when you're in the courtroom and courtroom setting with a veteran in front of you? Meet them where they are.
Well, the only rule I kind of have in my Veterans Court is be honest. Be honest with me and be honest with yourself if you need, help. We have Bill Latham is here. He's our Vets Treatment Court coordinator, and Chris is our mentor coordinator. Both of them. We're lucky in Cumberland County, it being the largest military community, that they say you can't sling a stick without hitting a veteran. And so everyone on our team are veterans. And so I think you're able to gain a rapport with those participants. It's not going to be a snap of the fingers. And so you kind of have to gain their rapport and their trust. And I think once you do that, then they're more perceptive to kind of doing those things for themselves and trusting in you. So that's kind of, there's that thing about saying about veterans in a hole, and his pastor throws down a rope and to get him out, and his spouse throws down the rope to get him out. But then a fellow veteran climbs down the hole with him, and he says, "What are you doing down here?" He says, "I'm here to help you get out." And so there are a lot of good intentions out there, but you have to gain that rapport for the veteran to do any type of movement.
Great. At the Healing Transition here in Raleigh, Chris, how do you meet the veteran where they are?
So what Judge was sharing, the idea of establishing rapport with people is really important. And one of the ways that happens, and the way it happens at Healing Transitions, is through people's shared experiences. So people may not be considering making a change, and sometimes we may think that looks like, that they're not ready or they don't want it. But sometimes it's kind of getting a little bit of faith and hope to take action. And folks who can share their lived experience, and our model is a peer-based program. 75% of our staff are alumni. The participants play an active role, and we're Healing Transitions now. We used to be called the Healing Place. But that peer component is very critical, because it can bring people to a place of both making a decision, believing that there could be a different future for them. But I think what's really important about this also is that that's critical across many different stages of development. So you can think of recovery as involving like pre-covery, which is the person's not even really thinking about it yet, and how do we move them to a place to start to consider that. And then they get to a place where maybe they start thinking about, what could my life look like without this? And then there's another opportunity, which is, now that this has happened, what does my future look like? And, when the person is still using, there's no thought, time, or energy put into what could my life look like. And having people who can be role models and build rapport and be examples to help inspire and encourage are really important. And that's kind of been one of the shortcomings historically of addiction treatment, is that we've really been focused kind of on that crisis intervention and not enough involvement with getting people kind of ready and supporting them after the intervention. This isn't veteran specific, but we've been really pleased with our partnership with Wake County EMS. Paramedics were feeling frustrated responding to overdoses and administering Narcan, and questioning whether what they were doing was making a difference. And we said, maybe if we could pair you with somebody who's had overdose experience and is in recovery now, maybe they would be a resource. And so that's really transformed a lot of the ways for this population of folks who are experiencing overdose, that we're able to start engagement and both reduce harm but also increase the risk for finding recovery and a better life.
Great, thank you. Derek, talk to us about early intervention strategies that have worked for you in your personal life and what you've seen work for other veterans like you. And what does that look like in your mind?
So for me, from my experience, I have really noticed that veterans come in two flavors mainly. We're either 0 or 100. We're either going to keep getting back up regardless of the circumstances, whether our decisions we made were good or bad, or we will sit down and get comfortable with our mistakes and our demons and isolate and kind of wither away. Sadly, I have gone through both. But the early intervention of individuals in my life, and some of which are on this panel, having someone not just believe in me and want to help me, but held me accountable at my level, met me where I was, and I'll put the same amount of work in that you put in. I'm going to walk the path with you. I'm here if you need me. Like a judgment-free environment. When I came down here in North Carolina in 2014, I ran away from Pennsylvania and the issues that I had there. Tried to reach out for help, and it ran me over. I, tried to do everything I could. Plus, I was ill-equipped at the time. I was a young kid, stepped on an ID, was shot, So the best early intervention is finding those veterans that are the 100, helping them so that they can go back and be peer support network for the zeros, to help them be 100. Because we all have it within us to be that. We just need the proper food and guidance, which is lack of knowledge mostly, and the stigma, the stink that veterans have over decades, not just the Iraq War, Vietnam, Desert Storm. I mean, as long as we've had wars in this country, that's, from my opinion and my experience, that's what's helped me, and I've seen it help, and I've helped other veterans the same way. That's helped out the most.
Derek, thank you for your personal story and sharing it with us in the audience. Thank you. When we say drug criminalization of drugs in our area, in our state, what does that look like, and what does that mean to a veteran standing before you, Judge?
Well, I have no control over the laws that pass, depending on state to state. Every state has a different, I guess, criminalization of laws and drugs. But it's almost like, let me think about this. It's kind of like a larceny. A larceny, one person may steal a can of soup and another person may steal a car. There's a difference. And so with the criminalization of drugs, especially when I deal with them in Veterans Court, you kind of have to just, I don't want to say dissect, but you have to kind of really step back and see what is going on there. And so while as a judge, and as you well know, we're not here to kind of choose and pick the laws we like or we don't like.
Absolutely.
And so, but what we do have a big impact on is after that, is how we provide justice. And in that justice, it's, prevent recidivism. And in that justice, it's also assisting the state to have citizens that are not engaged in those type of behaviors, and to assist the individual so they don't further deteriorize in those type of behaviors. And so I think, as you well know, in the criminal justice system, when we deal with it, whether we like the laws or not, we have to definitely kind of deal with it in an afterwards manner. And in Veterans Court, that's exactly kind of what we do. So we see individuals from a variety. You don't see them just for drug offenses. You may see them for larcenies. You may see them for assault of conducts, domestic violence cases. And so, but just because you see what the crime is, that's not necessarily indicative of what the issues are under those charges.
Thank you, Judge. Now we're talking about the criminalization of drugs inside the courtroom, within the criminal justice system. What does the criminalization of drugs look like, Chris, at the healing transition, for example? What is it? What is your take? What is your historical perspective on the criminalization of drugs?
Yeah, so it's a balance that exists. You know, there's real public safety issues that need to be considered. You know, addiction creates public safety issues. But being all the way on one side like that, you know, divorcing it from public health responses and opportunities for recovery casts aside people and ultimately doesn't benefit us. We don't want to just have complete public health responses without thinking about individual and community safety. I think a lot of times there's complexity to what's involved. And so when thinking about an issue, it's not always just one thing. So there can be legislation passed like the Good Samaritan Law. And the Good Samaritan Law comes about because we want, particularly for parents who have lost a child, they want to feel like, for the next parent, that if their kid has an overdose, that folks don't feel terrified to call for help. How that is applied can look different. And then so sometimes what my role looks like is around advocacy and so forth. So we had, at Healing Transitions, we've developed a very robust overdose prevention and response program. We have overdoses that happen sometimes on our property, sometimes near our property. We had somebody that was staying with us during cold weather in 2022, getting shelter for the night, and they had an overdose. And, you know, everyone kind of responds to the 911 call, fire, EMS, and law enforcement. And the person was successfully saved, left with EMS. Law enforcement spent some time asking who folks were that, you know, responded to the crisis. And then, again, this is not necessarily representative of all law enforcement, but this officer went in and then ran those names to see if there were outstanding warrants, and then came in and, you know, arrested one of the guys that had just responded to a traumatic event. And so that involved kind of advocacy on my part, not just then, but also in future situations, and talking about, like, we want to be very respectful and try to be understanding of the important work that you do as an under-resourced you know, organization. I know that there's a lot of vacancies, a lot of stress upon them. We want to be sensitive to the work that you have to do, but please believe in the work that we do and try not to contribute to things that will discourage folks from wanting to receive help from us. So that's like kind of some of the real life examples of trying to be respectful of both the role of law enforcement, the laws in our state and our country, public safety considerations, public health considerations, but also not losing sight of that individual who may not, like, be the person that had the overdose, but was part of the response. And we need to believe that they deserve opportunities, and we need to foster and facilitate that.
Great, thank you. Derek, you touched on stereotypes. What does that look like for you, if you want to share with us from a personal perspective or from others that you've seen? And also, what does fear look like? Is the fear of being judged, is that real? Share that with us as well, please.
When we're in the military, it's very hard for us to, now I'm from the infantry, so specifically from the infantry mind state. If I let anyone know that combat affected me the way that I did, I will not get be up for board to get a promotion. I might be removed from my team. It might hold me back in other ways. I might, you know, be separated from my team and put elsewhere. And that transfers when you get out and transition into the civilian world, where for me, the local VA was very good at giving me any and all medications. I was a zombie in my own chair for a long time. When I reached out and asked for help, it didn't go well. Legal issues soon came after, and it really closed me up and isolated me when
Take it easy.
it broke my heart. The country I served and gave my life didn't listen to me as an individual. I was a number, I was a cog in the wheel, and they just used it to keep on going. Whatever they could to keep it from hitting the news or being an insurance claim or just a bad name for somebody else. Instead of hearing the cries for help before a lot of anger turned into violence, turned into suicidal ideations, turned into just a mess, and it just spider-balled. Not having the network, not having a judgment-free zone, the populace not having the knowledge, you know, not just veterans, but the allies, because, you know, we're one country. We should stand together at the best and the worst of times, and it didn't feel like that at all. So after everything had gone, I moved down to North Carolina as a homeless veteran, where I met Chris, left the house that I owned and everything, and all but gave up. And that was 10 years ago. So it's very real. And it's going to be hard to show and prove that it's possible for me to be sitting here right now unless we all work together. But the fear is real. And that's why a lot of us isolate suicide. It's only two types of veterans, 0 or 100.
Derek, we appreciate it. Thank you.
If I could add to that,
Absolutely.
you know, to his well put point, and that was what, if you take away anything from today, is veterans are, like you said, 0 or 100. And so gaining that rapport, gaining that trust is instrumental, because the military ingrains in you, suck it up and drive on, you know, and if you're hurting, you know, here's some pills. And if you're tired, suck it up and drive on. And so a good soldier does that. And it trains you from start to finish to be that way. And then when you get out, you're supposed to just throw that mindset away. And so in any type of, you know, engagement with the veterans, you have to gain that rapport. And that's why I always say, you know, be honest. Be honest with yourself, be honest with them. And then those barriers, you know, I'm untrustworthy. I don't trust anybody. And so I'm not trying to be funny about it. It's just, so I prefer to kind of be by myself. And if someone walks up to me, I'll do the smile and shake your hand. But we all get tired. We all get frustrated. We all suffer, you know, our private demons. But in order for that person to open up to you, he has to kind of think, well, why are you here? What's in it for you? And when they realize there's nothing in it for you besides helping your buddy, then there's a chance for you to kind of make some movement. So thank you for sure.
Great point, Judge. And I've seen that firsthand in your courtroom in dealing with veterans and your staff as well, to understand where that veteran's coming from, understand their perspective, and perhaps attempt to walk a day in their shoes, an hour in their shoes, to understand where they're coming from. So I've seen it firsthand in the courtroom while Judge Oliveira's been presiding for a number of years, working with veterans and dealing with their issues and working through the knotty, difficult issues that veterans face each and every day. So thank you, Derek, and thank you, Judge. Lucas, what does a veteran support system from the VA perspective look? What does that look like to you?
That's a great question, sir. Thank you. So I want to first give respect to Flo and Harold, who are in here, who helped start the Governor's Working Group, 15, 20 years ago or so. I want to point out Martin Woodard and my man John Turner, Veterans Life Center, which has been operational for a year, which kind of started from conversations in this room and other rooms a number of years ago. And so the point being that the VA recognizes, and correct me if I'm wrong, boss, that we have to link with the community. I think we've done a much better job in the last couple decades of not being as siloed, right? It takes the whole community. When an individual raises their hand and pledges to defend against foreign and domestic, there's a societal contract that's started, right? So the Veterans Administration is one piece of that contract, but it requires all of us, right? And so I think that from the VA perspective, it means that we've got to continue to build relationships and try to link communities of care, right? We've done better with the community in the care, where when we recognize, like, hey, it takes 8 months to get a mental health appointment, that's not acceptable, we'll pay for you to be seen in the community, right? But then what we don't do the best job with is the link and making sure that that care is continued. The other thing we've done better with is look at a more of a holistic perspective, right? And that it's not just my mental health condition. It's not just my substance use disorder. Like, where am I linked for community purpose and meaning, right? I think those are really important things. And if I could go off script real briefly.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. For the scope, in North Carolina, there's 30,000 folks that are in state prisons, right? There's over 80,000 people that are under community supervision. We don't have the best way to know how many of those folks are veterans. When I first started in this role, it was about 10% nationally of folks in prisons were veterans. In North Carolina now, it's closer to 6%. So that means of those 30,000 plus people in state prisons, about 2,500 are veterans, right? We don't have the best way to capture how many veterans are in jail, because we often don't ask the question, did you serve, right? So I can't stress how important it is to ask that question, right? So I just kind of wanted to give that scope. I'd also say, related to substance use, in March of 2023, the North Carolina Division of Adult Corrections came out with a substance use disorder treatment program report. And of the over 12,000 people that they did intake SASE screenings on, over 9,000 met criteria for either intermediate or long-term treatment. So that means at least 78% of folks, and that's probably underreport, right? Because some folks, there's language barriers, they're in segregation, they can't get it. So I'm saying, if that's the number of folks that need help who are in prison, what we've got to do a much better job of is way before that, how are we helping?
Absolutely, Johnson.
Could I add something?
Absolutely.
So my treatment court coordinator, Bill Latham's kind of smirking at me a little bit, but in Cumberland County, it took us for about a year or so work on it. We're trying to identify not only the veterans that are in prison, but the veterans that have come through the criminal justice system. It's been very difficult. So we've kind of are in the process of developing. We've gotten data dumps from the AOC, and this is helpful if anyone is thinking about opening a veterans treatment court or does any type of in-prison type of assistance. So the AOC, after a year of kind of struggling, has given us the data of every person that's charged in our county. We get them on a quarterly basis. And then Bill, the workhorse of our group, we're developing a database to take that data from the AOC and then filter it through squares. And I don't know if anyone knows what squares is. We're doing squares, right? VRSS, excuse me. The VRSS, the Veteran Reentry Service System. And what that does, if you're not aware with it, it identifies the individual whether they're in the military or not. So what we do is we scrub the data from AOC of every person that's charged, and that includes those that are incarcerated in the jails. And then we filter it through the VRSS system, which is run by the VA, and it will tell us, it'll spit out who is justice-involved vets. And so we're in the process of doing that, and we're happy to share that process with anyone else, especially through the working group here. But that's something we're in the process of doing, which assists us greatly in identifying those justice-involved vets that we're not getting into. Because guess what? When you come through the criminal justice system or the jail or residually, you're not sitting there and go, hey, I'm a vet, give me some help. And so, but it gives you the ability to identify them to then start that report process, whether it's pre-trial, post-conviction, or any of those matters. So if you, you can kind of hit up the big guy over there in green if you want some more information on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Lucas. Lucas, from a VA perspective, how do we work through the layers, or cut through the layers, if you will, to get that veteran the help they need and the support they need? How do we do that? And what does that look like?
That's a terrific question. So the VA, as most government organizations, is famously known for bureaucratic red tape, right? And so one of the things we have to do is be able to cut through some of that. Unfortunately, and this is not a reflection on the VA, this is all of our, except for Healing Transitions and a couple other spots, we don't have a firehouse model for substance use disorder, right? So if my house is on fire, I call, people come, spray the water, try to save it, right? If I'm saying I need help, you know, I'm living with addiction, this is what's going on in my life, unfortunately, we don't have the number of beds that are necessary around. Ask your question one more time.
How do we cut through? How do we cut through the layers, the thick layers that exist to help that veteran, to get the veteran the help they need, support they need?
So I think it goes back to, again, relationships and community, right? And remembering like what truly is our mission, right? So if the VA's mission is to help those who have borne battle, right, then we want to keep that up front in everything that we do. Do we have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. But with the help of all of you people in here, we can continue to do that. And we need our community partners to hold us accountable, right? So as a cog in the wheel, I often say that I work for the ancillary branch of the war machine in the belly of the beast. As a cog in the wheel, oftentimes the comments I might have to improve things might not be taken, because, you know, like I'm just down here, right? But when you guys say something, it can change, right? So that's some of the reasons that we have mental health access in Durham, because of our community members and veteran service officers who have said, hey, we need a better response. So it goes back to relationships, and then I think patience and persistence, right? And recognizing that there's barriers, but that together we can continue.
In partnership, right? Like you had mentioned in partnership.
Yes, sir.
So, great.
So Lucas is a good example of that relationship building. So he visits a lot of the programs and resources in the community. So it makes it much easier if there's a need for him to pick up the phone and call directly, and folks are familiar with him, you know, and so that's a good example of kind of that relationship building. I also think it's important to not lose sight of the informal networks. So there's a lot of informal networks out there that provide information. Derek learned about our services from one of our alumni, you know, and so there's a lot of informal networks out there that talk about where to get help, how to get help, and I think it's always important to kind of remember that they're out there and that they exist.
Thank you, Chris. Derek, what are the effects of isolation to a veteran, and how does that impact, and is it real?
It's dangerous, and it is real. And it's kind of like misery loves company. It'll stick to you. And it'll give you comfort, and it'll give you something to go back to anytime you... Because a lot of us lose our identity when we get out of the military. We don't have purpose. We're medicated. You know, me personally, like I said, I stepped on an IED and I was shot. I spent 4 years in the hospital. So I was all but institutionalized by the time I even wheeled out of there. Didn't feel like I was worthless. And that is a dangerous place to become comfortable for a very long period of time. And it's very hard to get out of. And it leaks into relationships. It leaks into even individuals that are willing to help you. You unknowingly push them away because they never see you. They see you once in a great while, and then all of a sudden they don't see you at all. But on what I was saying earlier, the knowledge that individuals like me exist and are out there, and the knowledge transfer from individuals that are on this panel, and Mayor and General Gaskins and everyday passerbys could all help link the vast amount of resources that are local and state and federal and community built and volunteering and all that together. Because it's not that we don't have the resources, we do. It's that they're scattered and we're not holding each other accountable and we're not communicating properly. Different languages, different perceptions, but isolation is dangerous. It really is.
Yes, yes, Chris.
A couple thoughts that come up listening to Derek is one, I think it's helpful for folks to think about how to help people as beyond just this intervention. A lot of times people are sold on the idea if you just go to treatment, then that's going to solve the problem, and then they're terribly disappointed when somebody relapses or worse yet dies. And I think we got to really shift this mindset and think, we don't have that expectation with cancer. We don't have that expectation with hypertension. We have this expectation that there may be this intervention, but there's going to be ongoing follow-up, and we're thinking about person over the long term. And then a lot of our formal systems aren't set up real well because they're not billable for that sort of stuff. So I think professionals and systems can do a lot to learn about indigenous and informal communities of support and how to link folks to those, because that's where a lot of the kind of resilience can reside, to help people stay engaged and not feel like an afterthought once they're done with a formal program, and to continue to be in an indigenous kind of community of support that can buffer against isolation.
Thank you, Chris.
I
Derek.
I don't want the message to be, woe is me or I'm a victim. It should be more of community and has given me the fuel that, they believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I'm not a victim. If I was, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I wouldn't be able to afford these really nice clothes and have a beautiful wife and kid and an amazing handicap accessible house that I seen you at just a few months ago there, sir. We are not victims. We can be extremely productive members of society. We just need the right accountability and guidance, not judgment.
That's a great point, Derek. So essentially, you're wanting a hand up, not a hand down, and you want the community support so that you can be the best citizen that you can. Citizen and a family person, family man to your family as well. So thank you. Lucas, in terms of the VA, what does it look like in terms of anticipating the needs of a veteran or veterans within a community? What does that mean to the VA? And let's say 5, 10 years from now, what does that look like? Or can you envision or sharing with us what the VA is looking at and what is the future 5, 10 years from now?
Do you need that disclaimer again?
Please, please. We've got some other folks in the room that could probably much better answer this question. Steve, Pete, Ms. Cruz, some of y'all. So one thing is, of course, just looking at the population, right, and seeing the population rising. So we can see that the VA in North Carolina has responded to that. We have, clinics in different communities now, right, where it used to be, you got to ride all the way to Durham, Fayetteville, Salisbury, Asheville, and that's a wrap. Now we have some community clinics, right, and we're building more. Again, I think what it looks like is continuing to collaborate and continuing to build partnerships, right? Because we hopefully have learned. So we've learned from, you know, the folks that came back from Vietnam and had a less than favorable welcome home, right? And we've tried to do better with yellow ribbon events, you know, when folks are, when units are first coming back, making sure that there's information available. But we got to continue to do that. I mean, I'm sure General Gaskins and his team could talk about how less than 50% of veterans in North Carolina get care from the VA, right? Or we're not even necessarily completely clear. The veteran service officers do a tremendous job of bringing resources back into the community, helping folks access service-connected compensation, right? Helping folks access GI Bill and educational. But unfortunately, we don't fund those services enough, right? And that's more of a representation of the state, and I don't want to get off a topic. Well, what I'm trying to say is that these folks are bringing money and resources back into the community and helping individuals live their best lives and be fully functioning, right? So what does 5 to 10 years look like for the VA? We know that we're going to continue to have folks that need care and assistance, and we are striving to do better, to do partnerships, and make sure that people have better experiences than they did in the past. Is that fair, Pete?
Yes.
If I could add to that, especially in vets court, the VJOs do a great job. And so in a vets court team, we have like a public defender, a DA, probation, parole, police department, our mentor corps, but when we have the VJO, the veteran justice officers from the VA. And so they come to every session and our pre-staffing, and they're there to kind of quickly assess the incoming veterans and make sure they have their appointments and stuff like that too. But there's a mindset when you talked about only 50% of our veterans in North Carolina getting any medical care. There's a mindset that I'm good. And I remember when years ago, a veteran came to our vets court, and I said, well, listen, go to the VSO, which is the County Veteran Service Officer, you know, and see if you're, you know, any disabilities, you know, because we're good. And he said, okay, well, have you gone? I went, no, I'm not gone. And this young soldier, and I guess the speak that some of our veterans are used to, most especially me, salty in a salty way, told me, well, sir, don't tell me to do something if you're not expletive willing to do it yourself. And I went, great point. And so we have to get past that mindset of we're good, you know, I'm not severely injured and stuff like that too. And so, you know, you have to encourage those people. And I come across people all the time that served, and I go, well, why don't you just go down to the VSO, you know, it's kind of like playing in the NFL, so whether you serve 2, 4, 12, 20, 30 years, and just let me twist your arm for 4 years every day. Sooner or later, whether even that minor thing is going to affect you. And so you have to get past that mindset. And I think that's kind of why, you know, North Carolina having the largest military community in the nation and only 50% go to the VA is kind of something that needs to be addressed. But you have to address the mindset that goes along with that to kind of overcome that.
Yes.
And I want to also mention that of veterans, right, like discharge and length of service. So one other thing the VA has done nationally is try to expand eligibility. So for folks who had, you know, other than honorable discharges, now eligible for emergent mental health, now eligible for some of the transitional housing and HUD-VASH things, right? And we, again, the only reason that happened is because veterans and community members got together and said, hey, of all those folks committing suicide, a large portion aren't even eligible to get help at the VA, right? And it also goes back to education and knowledge, right? Because if you have more than one hitch, you could still get services, right? Even if your last one. But a lot of us at the VA don't know that, and so we might even tell folks, sorry, you can't get anything. So it's the partnerships and the loop of accountability.
Thank you, Louis. And to your point earlier, General Gaskins and his team do exceptional work in connecting veterans to services. Again, connecting veterans to services. We can have 1,001 services, but if veterans are not connected, services are not doing any good. They do an exceptional work. So thank you, General. How do we become veteran change agents? And how do we improve the lives of individual veterans while still focusing on what's most important, the veteran himself or herself and their family?
So the old school Minnesota model of substance use treatment kind of looked at folks have to hit a bottom before they get help, right? William White and some other folks talk about the importance of like infusing hope. Maybe folks don't have to hit the bottom. Maybe I've been living on the bottom for a long time, whether that's emotionally, whether that's physically, whatever, right? How do we infuse hope into folks? And I think some of the panelists did a fine job of, by building rapport with other folks who have shared experience, right? And seeing the change that's happened, right? So there's a couple folks in this room who've, been kind enough to go into prisons with me and share stuff with folks, right? And I didn't serve, right? I didn't serve in the military and I didn't serve in prison. And so to hear from someone who has that experience is a lot better than to hear from some kind of poverty pimp like me, right? So again, the importance of informal networks and infusing hope.
Thank you, Lucas. And this is for the panel to chime in. How do we build a veteran-centric culture within our community? How do we do that, and what does that look like?
Well, it's easy in Cumberland County. Like I said earlier, you can't sling a stick without hitting someone in a uniform. So it's kind of easier if you live in Jacksonville, Seymour Johnson. But really, every community has a veteran. I mean, either we served or we know someone that served. And so there was an article I remember reading years ago how the VFW has changed over the years. There's a different mindset
That's
now.
right.
And so so you just have to kind of reach out. Every community is different. It's just like every individual we deal with is different. And so reach out to those local organizations that are in your community and see what you can do. But like I said earlier, one of the things we're doing, especially in our larger communities, and while Wake County may not be it's a large, or Charlotte is a large community, those databases, your VJOs, your VSOs, if they have the ability to identify those veterans, because they're not going to go up and go, hey, I need some help. You just have to gain a rapport, and sometimes it's just kind of having an event, and some people will come, and then they may take something away, whether it's paperwork, or they may engage you in a conversation. So you just kind of, I think, have to assess the community you're in, and then kind of just, put a welcome out there and kind of see who shows up.
Great panel. Thank you all for providing your insight, your perspective, and your knowledge on various veteran issues. We thank you. And at this time, any questions from the audience, please address them.
I'll start. Do I have to stand? Okay, good. Paul Cruz, Department of Veteran Affairs. Not Lucas's boss. Well, I'm his boss's boss's boss. But, and he did very well today. So I did great. You did great. A couple of things, that's really weird sounding. A couple of things, if I could, just some questions that you answered, if you don't mind. One of the things about, and it was a great answer about breaking through bureaucracy and how do you deal with that? Well, in the past, we all looked at the veteran crisis line or the veteran suicide line as only for suicides. But this day and age, the Veterans Crisis Line 988, just want to say that again, 988, if you're at the end of your rope, if a veteran is at the end of the rope, even if it's not you, but you know a veteran who is at the end of the rope, you can make that call to 988 and to break through that barrier of the bureaucracy and get straight into getting service and getting care and making sure that we're addressing that mental health crisis or that crisis that's impending. So I just want to say that. The other thing about your comment about how do we do better at making sure that everybody has access, and Lucas mentioned this a little bit, but I just want to call out the legislation. It's called the Compact Act, which just came out last year, which allows any veteran, doesn't matter if you had a bad conduct discharge, doesn't matter how long you served, well, it does matter if you've served. It doesn't matter if you're service connected or VA eligible. If you're having a mental health crisis, you can go to any medical center, so any private medical center, and the VA will pay for that care and will pay for an extended period of time to get you out of that episode of care and get you into the VA for services. So something that a lot of places don't know. I was just talking with the CEO of Wake Med here just this morning and having those discussions about these are resources that are out there, but maybe a lot of folks don't know about because they're new, and it's how do we get this information out? Well, we do it through these. But I just think it's a really, really good model and something that people should be taking a part in. And the last thing is I think it's really important, and the VA, working along with the Governor's Working Group, General Gaskins, myself, and some of our VSOs are working with Gilling School of Public Health in a program where we're trying to build a model that's called Building Veteran Healthy Communities. It's where we really do try to help surround our veterans who live in our communities, who maybe we don't know. You know, the majority of the folks who commit suicide, or the veterans who commit suicide, are not even enrolled in the VA. But somebody in their community knows them. And how can we build community capacity to recognize failed social determinant of health or some kind of pending mental health crisis way upstream? Not waiting until we get down worried about lethal means. We need to be way upstream and turning a veteran into open arms of resources that are available to them. So there's a model being built here, working with the Governor's Working Group and working with the UNC School of Public Health and the VA to build those types of models where communities can build that. And we talk about communities, it's not just a city or a town, but we're also talking about large employers, faith-based organizations, and a lot of different places. So thanks. Just want to throw those out there.
Thank you, Director.
Director, if I could add something to that. I thought about this last year. I suspect, and I'm not a mental health professional, but I suspect when someone's going through a mental health crisis, there's probably a hesitancy, especially in a veteran mindset of, let me get in my car and drive to the VA, or let me pick up a phone, I don't know who I'm talking to. And so I think in the day and age, we have to kind of maybe change how we approach that. And I thought about, if there's anyone out there who's really good at apps, maybe there's some sort of app. Everyone has their phone. I'm sure everyone has their phone. And while I hate social media, how many of y'all check social media today? Not to go on Facebook and request help, but maybe there's some sort of technological different ways of engaging those kind of younger minds, where you hit an app and maybe you talk to a fellow veteran in your community or something like that, versus getting in a car and going to the VA is probably not something someone under distress is probably, especially when you have that mindset, leave me alone, and as Derek said, that misery is a heavy warm blanket, even though it's not healthy. So maybe us thinking about how to make it easier for those technological means, whether you're an app or something like that. Because I think getting on a phone call, it takes courage, and self-resilience that maybe that person at that moment doesn't really possess. And so we have to kind of maybe think about different ways on how to kind of bridge that gap.
That's right.
Great point, Judge. There is actually, the crisis line does have an app, texting, and chat components as well. And then there's also...
Was that a good plug? Did you alley-oop? There you go. Send me a check later on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, panel.
I'm Nejla Munchauer with Wake County Veteran Services. Hi, Lucas. Nice to see you in person. I work with the practical application of these events with my housing, with my veterans in our community. Please help me understand in North Carolina how we can better coordinate the supports needed for our justice involved and our veterans that are in the midst of a substance abuse crisis to support the interventions that we're talking about today. So here's what I'm asking. We have folks that are justice involved and they end up not being able to stay with family because of legal requirements. You have young families that have one car. So somebody can't get to work if you can't stay together. They're not eligible for food stamps because their together income makes them ineligible, but they can't be together, but they can't get the support they need because of their justice involvement and their substance use issues. How do we support those folks better so they can get the help they need and come back and help in our community like Derek?
I don't know if I got this. Hold on, maybe my mic, the back.
We
But I don't know, and maybe Lucas can answer this better than I can, or the judge. But you know, there's nothing. Someone from the VA may be able to speak to it better. There's nothing, especially with the just involved veterans, that would preclude them from not getting benefits unless I think you're incarcerated for more than 30 days. Or something similar to that, but other than that, I don't think, or Bill will probably tell me, I don't think there's anything that would preclude that from getting any type of benefits cut off, other than being incarcerated for more than a period of time. I thought it was 30 days that would cut off your benefits.
But that doesn't pay for two houses, right? If you have a family that can't stay in the same house, you don't have enough, if you're barely affording the housing that you have, and you can't stay together because of your legal requirements, we've got to support our folks that are justice involved so they can get the help they need and their families can stay in housing.
And great point. I don't know what you mean by legal requirements that would preclude them from. Well, protective orders. Then you have. I don't know if the VA will segregate that or not. But I sit in court every day, especially domestic violence court, and that's a public. You know, there's a balance there where you have to kind of ensure the safety of the community or safety of the potential state's witnesses. But we run a pretrial program in Cumberland County through the Veterans Court, and we specifically are involved in the domestic violence courts, and we are involved with the district attorney's office. So they identify someone who is charged with a domestic violence crime, and then we put them in our pretrial program. And so, but it depends on the judge. Really, it's up to the judge to determine the terms of pretrial release. But most of the time, they're not permitted to have any. If someone charges another with domestic violence assault, then most of the time they're precluded to have any contact with the individual. And so there's not much you can do with that. But we put them in a pretrial program to see if we can assist them with those other needs.
To the judge's point, oftentimes the judge here in Wake County places the individual on pretrial. Part of the pretrial interview is to make sure that the individual has a place to stay, to live. In particular, if it's domestic violence, because they can't be with their spouse in the same house, if you will. So that's something that's worked through on a case-by-case basis in Wake County. Can we do better? Of course, but it's looked at very, very carefully to ensure that that veteran, that person, at a minimum, has a place to live and stay, whether it's for another relative, some other way, but there are ways, and judges here in Wake County do that each and every day. For the most part, do a really good job at it. So.
Thank you so much. We do not have any more time for questions right now, but will you all be around after the meeting for some additional questions? All right, thank you so much.
Is there brownies? Do you have brownies?
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are some types
All right, then I'll be here. I'll be
good
here.
goodies back there. Thank you, panel, so much. It was such a good discussion. Yes.
I like to mention a supporter of Derek Sharp, and that's his wife standing right there, lovely wife, okay, Kara Sharp. That's his #1 supporter. Thank you, Kara.